Wow, it's been a while since I said it, but I'm happy to say welcome back to the Commission Corner today with a new episode. And this time we have Alex Wu with us, a sales incentive manager, sales compensation specialist, you could say. So today is all about sales compensation. And Alex, we are very happy to have you.
Oh, thank you, Greg and Alexander. It's a pleasure to be here. What you guys have been doing, it's amazing. Really spreading the knowledge, giving all the love to the salespeople. Oh, happy to be here.
Yeah, so wonderful. And we will have like around 30 minutes to dive very deep into the topics of sales compensation. So maybe in the beginning to give some framing, it's a quite specific role in a company also to just focus on sales compensation. Is it something that you have always been excited about, the topic of incentivizing people, or how come that this is some sort of your focus area?
When I started with this job, obviously coming in as a junior, and that was in the software as a service industry, I kind of hated that job, really to admit it, because I was really working just on the payroll side, calculating commissions or whatsoever, and I thought, okay, this is really the most boring stuff ever, because I never wanted to be an accountant or anything that looks like it whatsoever. But the more you go and start deep diving into the data and you start to realize where sales compensation or sales incentives fits within an organization, it just becomes way more interesting, right? Because in the end, sales compensation is not only about payroll or calculating commissions, but it's also about retaining your high performers, coaching up your low performers, making sure that the company is gaining revenue and not only having costs. It, it, it is really there to create win-win situations between the company and the sales employee by itself. And I think the most beautiful thing of it is why I'm so passionate about it is it's very meritocratic, right? If we look at salespeople, um, those are the guys who pick up the phone at the family party really to close out a deal. They are doing tons of work, right? And it is only fair that they also earn a lot of money. Also, sales incentives, if done right, and then you have sales employees who can potentially earn more than a CEO. And it's really earning a lot of money for a lot of work. So I think this is really an amazing world there.
Yeah, yeah, and especially talking about a salesperson earning more than a CEO. I guess it was a couple months ago, I think almost a year. There was a news report, for example, about investment manager at Deutsche Bank, like the biggest bank in Germany. There was also saying that this salesperson even earned more money than the actual CEO Christian Sewing back then. So it was really insane to see that, but it actually proves your point. Talking about sales compensation or sales incentives, Alex, I mean, it's a very specific role, as Gregor already mentioned. Are there any other people like you in Europe, or is it a very, let's say, unique role?
It's a unique role, and within Europe, I wouldn't say there are many who are specifically specialized in sales compensation. And the reason why is that sales compensation, by its fundamentals, is a very capitalistic role, right? And obviously, it's much more developed in the US, but you are seeing the transition happening within Europe right now. And right now in Europe, when you look at sales compensation, there are more than often those are people who are working in finance, revenue operations, or HR, having sales compensation as a side project. But now there is more recognition and there is more need for growth for those companies. They're now really recognizing that sales compensation deserves its own place.
So it will take some time, I guess, so that this role gets more accepted. Also, maybe not in enterprise companies only, but in medium-sized companies, mid-market, or SMBs even. So is it a chance to build up a community already? Or would you be too early to start a community around sales compensation specialists?
I think building a community, especially within Europe, it would be very value adding. It really empowers those people with a side project to specialize more in it. It also empowers them to understand what sales compensation is in the broad terms and how to make strategic decisions. There are currently also a few communities already out there. One is created by the Alexander Group. They also host the conferences, and the second one is by Everstage. They sell sales compensation software, and their community is called Uncapped, UNCAPPD.
Yeah. And was it? I guess every salesperson knows what it means. Uncut commission.
Probably, I think they love it. It's I'm personally not a fan of capped commissions, but we can talk about it another time. So
Yeah. And maybe Alex, before we dive deeper into the topic, maybe you can say a few things about your let's say your career. What made you go into this topic? What are things that make you special and make you an expert about commissions?
okay, so I graduated during the COVID times in applied economic sciences with expertise in marketing, totally unrelated. And my first job was within the commune of Kruinen in Brussels, trying to realize smart city projects. Right? And then after 6 months of time, I realized that working for the government, it's a little bit too political and slow moving, and obviously just graduating and looking for the adventure. I also realized maybe later when I have 2 dogs, a few kids, and a house to pay off, maybe I'll go back. But right now I'm looking for the adventure, and that's when I moved into the software as a service space and started my sales compensation specialist role. And obviously, I just kept more and more deep diving into it, and I become more interested. In the beginning, I hated the job. I started now really to love it, and I'm very passionate about it. And I also plan to stay within the role in the future as well.
So is it the part to make use of the data that lies in a company, and you can try to, let's say, create an incentive scheme out of historical data? Or is it that you like to communicate within the stakeholders? Because I can imagine that talking of sales compensation, you do need to take care of revenue operations, employees of HR, finance. So what's the specific spark that you are looking for in that role?
Looking for the spark when designing sales comp plans, you mean?
Mm.
When designing sales comp plans, there are obviously 2 factors to it. One, you have your historical data, your modeling that you need, because from the moment that you decide what your new comp plan is going to be, you have to start forecasting what those changes will imply in the terms of costs. So that's the finance side, really, because we want to know how much money are we saving, how much is going to cost us, what is the positive impact of those changes, right? And so when it comes to actually finding the changes, we need to know what the GTM strategy is. That's where it starts, and then we start involving all the different stakeholders: HR, finance, revenue operations, executive buy-in from executive leadership, and we need to be all together and to make sure that all puzzles that they fit. And once they fit, then you can start piloting, and then you have the final piece. How do you sell it to your salespeople? Because the way how you communicate it, it's going to determine everything. If you're just going to start reading off numbers, then you will miss the message. Because sales compensation, in the end, it's not only about strategy top down, but it's also about execution bottom up. And with that being said, feedback from your sales employees, it's also important. It may not necessarily be a democracy, but at least that their voice is heard.
And maybe to just give a follow-up question, when you mentioned it's quite important to have a good communication strategy for introducing new commission schemes, would you say that this communication part also lies within the role of a sales compensation specialist? Or is the specialist more about creating the incentive schemes and maybe preparing the communication, but then it's part like of the leadership team's indirect sales?
It could be both, or it really depends on the situation. You have to look at the profile of the sales compensation specialist. If that sales compensation specialist have worked in sales, for example, it just makes it easier, right? Now, ideally, of course, you have the sales leader really to communicate to your sales individuals. This is our strategy. this is how we want you to be compensated, and we want you to earn really that much of money. But in order to get there, you need to do this, right? So it depends. I cannot give a clear answer on that.
All right. So first of all, you mentioned it's the most important part is to have the GTM strategy, and then you apply commission strategy to it to really drive a certain behavior. Maybe to get a step back, what are sales incentives for you, and how do you see that they fit in an organization? Because I assume that not all listeners might know what we are already talking about.
Well, sales incentives for me in general, I think as a rule, it is just very interesting, because when you look at your two main resources you have in a company, and then we're talking about human capital and financial capital, sales incentives has the ability to have such a tremendous impact on both, right? And when we talk about human capital, it's really about how can we get the most out of people, and then reward at the same time. And when we look at financial capital, then it's really about the investment, the variable salary that we're paying them out. So I think sales incentives in general, it just has a very, very big impact, and it basically has a foot in every department. And if you see sales incentives as a department on its own, it is actually designed to break silos. What I often see, and I'm not going to speak for all companies, is that, for example, HR, they will only think within their bubble, and finance will only think within their bubble, and they will not necessarily connect the dots. And sales incentives connect all dots all together.
And in your opinion, how often would you change an incentive scheme? Or is it more of adding spiffs to an existing base commission model in a company?
How often a sales incentive scheme should change? I would say on a yearly basis, because there are a lot of factors that you cannot control, and the global economy, whether the finances on your client side, whether they are going to churn or not, your sales incentive scheme should be adapted to it. Whether it's aggressive or not aggressive, it doesn't really matter, but more than often you will always see a change, always.
Yeah, it's funny because in some companies, especially in German, more traditional companies, sales compensation or the entire topic about incentives is more of a annual bonus, which is determined by the company's revenue. So it's not really focused on the individual contributor, but more on the company success. And those companies, they probably would never change the incentive scheme and lose maybe, a lot of potential.
But then we're not really talking about sales incentives, right? We're rather talking about a bonus plan, because bonus plan, that's profit sharing. So we are not trying, whatever we are trying to change there is not intended to drive a certain behavior out of our salespeople. Now, obviously, the moment you recognize that sales comp plans, because sales comp plan do intends to drive sales behavior, that it will become more effective. And that's tying back to what I said before. It has an impact on the human capital, how you try to get the most out of a certain situation.
Mm-hmm. And when we talk about maybe, for example, now the German economy, and also that they are rather using like a bonus instead of real sales incentives, do you see a big difference between the US and, for example, Germany in terms of sales compensation, sales incentives?
In the US, sales compensation, as I said before, it's more developed. You will see actual sales compensation plans really trying to drive sales behavior. Depending on how big the company is, with the startups and the scale-ups or other very aggressive sales-minded companies, they are having very aggressive accelerators, right? So you will have high performers who are earning hundreds of thousands, whereas the low performers earn close to nothing. So I think that would be probably the biggest contrast with German companies.
Yeah, as you mentioned, US is quite developed when it comes to sales compensation, to variable pay, they probably are also utilizing more and more tools to get the operational part or the administrative part of sales compensation into a software. In Germany and also in Europe, we still see many companies working in spreadsheets and having the information stored in their own CRM, quite of manual work to export that and get the compensation out of it. So in your opinion, what is the best stage for a company to introduce also a sales comp tool and move away from Excel? Is there something like benchmark that you would propose?
I'm not really sure if there is a benchmark, but maybe the sales comp software vendors that they do have a benchmark for this. But in my opinion, when you decide to opt for a sales comp software, there are two main things that it's going to leverage. One is automation, to make sure that all administrative work, the manual errors, that it's going to get eliminated and taken over. And then the second one is really data leverage and insights, and because that is also very important. And especially on the second part, on the data insights, it is important that you have clean data, because for one, I've worked with spreadsheets before, and I've also enjoyed the transition to go to a software. So I really know what the benefits are of a software, and I really love those sales comp softwares out there. But for me, the condition is always to make sure that your data infrastructure in the company, that it's good, that it's clean, it's centralized, because that data infrastructure will build a bridge towards your sales comp software. If your data is a mess, then what you get in the software will also be a mess. Your insights that you get as a result of it will become unreliable. I hope this makes sense.
It definitely makes sense. I mean, we have already seen it in the operational business that we have, that especially fast-growing companies do not spend a lot of time on making sure that the data quality is pretty high. They just execute, and somehow they get lucky to be successful with that. But I've also attended an event recently where also a logistic company was present, and they told me that they have fragmented data. They have data in the CRM system, they have data in the data warehouse, and basically these data points do not talk with each other, which also has a negative effect that now where AI is present and you really want to leverage the data, as you mentioned, it's not possible because the data points are not connected. This is something that I recently saw. Maybe since we're talking about the topic of AI, Alex, what use cases do you see in sales compensation for AI?
I've really thought about this, because something that you see with a lot of sales comp softwares nowadays, at least in the past year or past year and a half, is that they're all transitioning into AI. And I think that AI will, when it comes to data insights or making sales compensation plans more comprehensible for the salespeople or seller engagement, I think AI will have a huge impact there. Right? What we want to see eventually is that those sales comp softwares, that they motivate the salespeople to sell more, that they're thinking about their commissions. Because if we put ourselves in the shoes of our salesperson, it's really about, I need to hit this target to get this amount of money. And if I hit this amount, I get this accelerator, I get even more money. And I believe that the sales comp software can really play on that connection.
Yeah, many try to translate Excel into the software first, and then they are wondering why it's not that engaging for the user, especially who will earn commission. In also that regard, to motivate sales force, what part do challenges take? Is it like only to understand what I can earn, or also how I rank between others? Do you have some point of experiences when it comes to healthy competition?
Well, if there is something among the salespeople, it's definitely bragging rights, right? I mean, if you're having the highest form of achievement, you definitely want to tell your colleagues about it. Hey, I'm the best. I'm going to the president's club. I mean, in the end, they brought in a lot of money. They are earning a lot of money. It's something to be very proud of. That's what you're being measured on. It's and I have a friend of mine who was an account executive, and he told me, and I don't know whether it's true, but at least he said it was within his company, is you're only as good as the last deal you closed. You see, so you have to keep performing. You have to really keep performing. You have to be on the top of your game the whole time. I believe that salespeople, they deserve all the love that they can get. And from my end, I'm only happy to serve them. It's a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, the spotlight is on, and the pressure is on as well, as you mentioned. Alex, you mentioned that you, for example, like to take a look at sales compensation models once a year. Of course, if there are any other macroeconomic changes, then it might need to happen faster. But let's stick with 1 year. How do you convince sales reps that the new model that you have thought about is actually better than the last one? What is the best practice for that?
So let's talk about and I always try to divide our salespeople in 3 subgroups, right? So you got your bottom 10% performers, you got your median, and they are going to represent the middle 80, and you got your top 10% performers. And when it comes to where they really are sitting, we are looking at the Gauss curve, right? The bell curve. So what's important there is whenever you make a change, is you communicate where the carrot is and what the stick is and and how it aligns with the strategy, why you're doing it. So regardless of what their feedback is, but their feedback is still important. It is just important to be transparent about it. Show some leadership, have a narrative. In the end, you are selling an idea to them and they have to accept it, because otherwise the execution of the strategy will just fail.
And in that regard, because you also mentioned the bell curve, do you focus more on like the upper part of it, or do you try to find a compensation model where everyone performs best? I think that's quite of a challenge for most companies, as sometimes the best 20% bring in 80% of the revenue. So you really want to engage those 20%, but in the end, it's just 20% of the sales force. And you don't want to leave like the huge average behind. Would you still focus on these 20% when thinking of sales compensation, or try to include everyone?
Let's say we'll give everyone a chance, because when it comes to communication and and if you're transparent about it, how it aligns to the strategy, and your top 10% performers, it's important for them how they reach those top accelerators. How do they earn? How can they maximize that money? But the way how, let's make the assumption that they're very skilled, very talented. Usually they will manage how to get there. And so when it comes to the middle 80, it's important to say, hey, you have to go this direction, right? And this is what you'll get if you go there. And when it comes to the bottom 10% performers, then you'll get 2 groups. And I think when it comes to the transparent communication, it is actually very effective, because the ones that will give a buy-in, they will actually invest their own time to understand how they can become better, or how become a middle 80 or a top 10. And the ones who do not want to buy in, those are usually not the salespeople you want with the company in the long term.
Yeah, that's the hard truth, I guess. Some people are not fit for the role that are probably in right now, but they might fit in with another company. And Alex, you mentioned that one of the key points to make sales incentives, sales compensation a real driver for the company is, of course, transparency. Are there any other do's or don'ts that you see and that you can share with us?
From a sales compensation specialist side, don't is a big no-no is the moment you actually start ignoring retention and operational outcomes when making changes. Also, when you choose metrics and KPIs, always make it measurable, because the moment it is immeasurable, you will create a gray area, and then it really opens up a discussion where the company wants to minimize costs and the salespeople want to maximize their own commissions, right? And then you get a mismatch, and then attrition will become an outcome. Something that I see with bigger companies I've spoken with is the habit of over standardizing. Now, standardizing has a very big advantage. It makes things more scalable, and obviously if you move to 30k, 40k, or 100k employees, you will have to standardize. But standardizing should never be the goal itself, because every sales comp plan is tailored to the uniqueness of the market to make it as efficient as possible. But if standardizing destroys that uniqueness, then you're missing the goal.
And when looking maybe also on industry level, we see many fast-growing software companies introducing very engaging incentive models. We also see it with larger sales teams at other tech companies. But when thinking of commissions, there might be some industries which may benefit a lot of a good sales compensation scheme, but are not really aware of it. So when you think of the entire industry range that our world offers, is there any industry where you would think of, well, there might be some underusage of sales compensation and this industry could benefit from introducing?
I believe in an industry with very high margins, it means that you do have a lot of cash, and you have the ability to go more aggressive and to reinvest in your salespeople. And those are usually the companies that should make use of sales compensation schemes as aggressive as possible to grab as much market share as they can. Obviously, it's a little bit more complex with low margin industries. I cannot think of a solution right now on those ones though.
So maybe when we talk about let's say industries in general, and you mentioned the margin part, it might also be interesting not to only think about the, let's say, high margin industries, because you mentioned probably high margin is for you above 50%, or what how do you define high margin?
I cannot give a number necessarily, but let's say software companies, right?
Yeah.
You make a software and you rent it out, you license it out a million of times, and your biggest cost factor will be basically your cost of stuff. But anyways, the idea behind it is you make something once, you don't have to remake it, you just have to improve it, and you sell it a million of times. That's what I consider, for example, high margin.
Got it. So when we talk about, let's say, these low margin companies, it might be also, I think, a good thing that when they have let's say a very short sales cycle. So if they have to sell, or if they sell lots of goods, lots of products, for example, but with low margin, it might still be interesting to also involve some sales incentives there, because then they actually can afford it, right?
Yeah, definitely. It's and maybe I misspoke. I think companies in general will always benefit from a sales compensation scheme. In my opinion, every company should have it. Obviously, something that you do see is the more market share a certain company has, and the more mature it is, and if it did acquire, and if it acquire enough market share and it's just sitting there quite well, then you see those companies transition more towards something that looks like a bonus plan and profit sharing. They're already doing well. Taking more market share is always possible, but there's not so much more to take.
So maybe to all high margin companies or also low margin companies out there listening in, we are getting to the end of the podcast, but we have a game that we usually play with our guests, Alex, to decide either or when creating a new incentive scheme. So everyone listen in. Alex, if you would create a new incentive scheme for a company, let's say of 100 salespeople and a high margin company, so you have some budget to create a nice incentive scheme, would you rather focus on fixed income for the employees or a variable pay?
I always try to opt for a pay mix of 50-50 or 60-40 when it comes to the salespeople. It obviously depends on a lot of factors, but those are usually the most interesting sales comp plans out there. The beautiful thing is that sales behavior is also you can see it very well there. Well, when you deep dive into the statistics.
And the second part, you have two options. One is like you give the salesperson a revenue share, like a percentage on, let's say, a certain metric like revenue, for example, or you have a predefined target and they earn based on this target attainment. What would you go with?
I definitely say on target attainment, and the reason why I say this is also on the operational side. You can start identifying who your overperformers or underperformers are. If it is just, for example, 10% of what you sell, there is no outlook. You just keep selling. It's it's also very hard to say this is what the benchmark is across the industry. It's from what point do you actually start saying that this is a bottom 10% performer or top 10% performer? I think on target commission, on the analytics side, it just provides tons of values. Also from a sales employee side, it gives you bragging rights. I overachieved. I'm the top performer. You get you can. I mean, that's how your work is measured. How much are you achieving on target?
Yeah, fair. Talking or speaking of overachievement, there might also be some underattainer or low performers. Would you punish them by introducing a cliff into the commission model, or would you work without a cliff?
And I assume that you are speaking of thresholds, right? You need to hit a certain attainment in order to earn some money.
Yes.
I've always been a fan of a no cliff because they're just putting the work there. I mean, you might as well just put a de-accelerator there to drive the behavior towards 100% attainment. I do have to say I've seen companies work with cliffs and those cliffs work. So there is no objectively correct answer, and just subjectively I'm saying I prefer the no cliff.
And now the last point, we talked about this at the very beginning of the podcast already. Would you cap commission or would you leave it uncapped?
It's uncapped for sure. It's capping commissions. It's just a perfect ingredient for sandbagging your deals to your next period. Once you're maxed out on your commissions, what's the point really to continue the work there, so to speak? Or you can already start building the foundation for your next period. But as a company by itself, you want to try to maximize your revenue per period, and capping commissions is going to work against it, in my opinion.
Maybe a quick follow-up on that. Is there any scenario where you think that a capped commission might be useful for the company?
Capping commissions is usually a form of windfall policy. So let's assume that we are used to our salespeople are getting deals of averagely 30K in, but suddenly someone is getting a 1 million deal in, but the money is going to come gradually over time, over 2 years maybe. But because of a lack of windfall policies, then you cannot pay that upfront, the whole commission amount, because then you're making a negative cash flow, so to speak. And there are alternatives to it, right? But if you have a proper windfall policy set, then you don't need capped commissions. Capped commissions is usually set as a last resort because you encountered such a situation and you just don't know how to deal with it.
Mhm. And when we talk about cash flow, what we also often hear from CFOs, a solution would be to install certain payout rules. So, for example, you split the entire amount and pay one batch upfront when the deal closes, a second one with certain milestones, etc. So then over a period of X, the payout is done in full, but you have not the problem with the cash flow. That's usually also how
Exactly.
CFOs see it.
And that's one of the different solutions of windfall policies, right? It's but in the end, it's all about how do you sell this to your salespeople? How do you communicate this? Because obviously from their end, they will always start to think, okay, but you're holding my commission back,
Mhm.
right? But explaining the broader picture is just as equally important there.
Yeah, I guess that's a very good last sentence. Alex, it was a pleasure to pick your brain today to get your perspective on sales compensation. Also to see that there's a lot of potential also from your perspective on the market in general. I guess we talked about high margin, low margin companies, and especially that sales compensations only make sense if they're applied to a go-to-market strategy, if the go-to-market strategy is in place. Yeah, with these words, it was a pleasure to have you, Alex, and thanks for being our guest today.
Thank you so much, guys, for hosting me. It's been a pleasure to be here. It's all the love to the salespeople out there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.